medieval era has always fired my imagination.
A world of legend, knights and castles, a time of jousts and heroic battles. But it was also a time of building, a time of change, and a time of innovation.
My name is Mike Loads, and I've spent my life trying to understand the past by experiencing it.
I'm an historian who believes that when you get your hands on the past, you discover what a surprising place it was. A world with familiar challenges, but very different solutions.
I'm going on a journey to explore the medieval world.
A world that spanned 1,000 years, from the fall of the Roman Empire to the Renaissance.
Fly. I want to get as close as possible to the everyday lives of ordinary people.
And to take part in the pursuits of the nobility.
I'm going to experience what it was like to live in this fascinating period of our history. Some of it will be everyday details. Some of it will be spectacular.
It will all be 100% authentic.
Clear!
I'm going medieval. I'm focusing on the 1200s and 1300s, which for me is the high point of the period. And I'm starting with a classic image, the castle. Early castles were weapons of intimidation and attack. They weren't just about defense, and they weren't made of stone.
The first castles were like this, on high mounds with wooden towers surrounded by a wooden palisade fence. In fact, they were very like the American forts of the 1800s. And that's what they were. They were cavalry forts. And they came into being about 1,000 years ago with a new type of warrior, the knight, a horse-born warrior who rode a proud, spirited war horse. And war horses need feed, they needed shelter, they needed veterinary care, they needed a base. And these bases were aircraft carriers for horses.
You deploy your fleet of wooden castles deep into enemy territory.
As you pushed ever forward into lands of conquest. And from here, I can control the land for 10, 15 miles. The land that I can send a patrol out and get back before nightfall.
But who were these knights? The popular romantic image is of the knight in shining armor, who spends his time jousting and wooing ladies. There is some truth in that, but first and foremost, a knight was a soldier.
The cult of knighthood was centered and founded on the elite horse-born warrior. First weapon of attack was the lance. Knights were shock troops, smashing their way to victory with the impact charge.
But knights, especially in England, fought as often on foot as they did on horse. A group of my friends, all experts in a range of historical skills, are going medieval with me to help me uncover the reality of the medieval world.
Knights were the military elite, and that didn't change whether they fought mounted or on foot. Above all else, they were crack troops, and that meant constant, hard training.
The training was exhausting. The French knight Boucicaut said you should run at least a mile a day in your heavy mail shirt.
Knights trained every day to accustom themselves to the grunt and sweat of wearing armor. This is the pell. This stout wooden post is the medieval equivalent of the boxer's punch bag. They're working the pell with wooden swords. Many of the texts tell us that the wooden swords would be double the weight of the steel sword. So this is not an easy option. This is to build up your strength and your stamina.
In battle, fighting was hard, vicious and brutal, and knights, tough fighting men, fought with every means at their disposal.
They're using their shields to fight with. For body checks, they can use them with the edge of the shield. But of course, the shield on the battlefield is really there to protect you against archers. That's why you're really carrying this. But in tight press of men, it also becomes a weapon.
Knights trained hard to master a range of all-in fighting techniques.
Wrestling grips and holds were an essential part of medieval sword fighting. Gripping the blade to use the sword at half sword. From here, I can pull his sword out of the way, I can go for his face, smashing his teeth out, or I could trip him with the crossguard. What would happen in a battle is the crush of men from either side squeezes you in. Then we're pushing them back. They're getting closer and closer, and eventually they're in a tight melee, and finally they have no choice but to fall to grips and grapples.
Wrestling techniques were of particular use when knight came up against knight on the battlefield. They had their own code of honor, chivalry, and my sparring partner, Dr. Tobias Capwell, is an expert in the rules.
Knights are fighting other knights, other equals of the same social class. And within the brotherhood of chivalry, you don't necessarily want to have to kill your social equals all the time. You have the process of ransoming. You can force them to yield to you, they become your prisoner, and then you can sell them back to their family for an extraordinary profit. But they're not going to yield easily.
You've got to defeat them, but not kill them. Oh, yeah, I see.
Now, I've got you in an arm-breaking position.
He could break my arm.
And I can
feel that he can break my arm.
I can make it worse and worse until
I yield. And then I give you my word, I yield, I am now your prisoner, you can let me up.
Fine.
Chivalry works with people of the same class. Of course, if he doesn't perceive I am his same social class, then chivalry doesn't work, and he drops me to the dirt.
Knights were icons of the medieval age, but an equally powerful image was the castle. Castles conjure up both the romance and dread of the period.
Merci, Thierry.
But I'm not just going to look round an old castle. I'm going medieval to help build a new one.
Whoa.
This is Guédelon in France. A small team of experts are 15 years into a unique project. They're building a full-size medieval castle from the ground up. There's nothing else in the world like it. These craftsmen use only authentic materials and medieval building techniques. There's no electricity, no power tools, no dump trucks. Everything is done by hand, exactly as medieval builders would have done it.
Bonjour, Clément.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Ça va?
Bienvenue à la carrière.
Merci. Because all castles start here. They start with the stone. They start in the quarry.
Even quarrying the stone uses nothing but traditional techniques and hard labor. Once the stone was quarried, it was shaped by stonemasons. The chief mason was the most important person on any castle building project. He was the architect, builder, designer, craftsman, and engineer, all rolled into one. Below the mason was an army of tradesmen, maybe up to 200 men on a castle this size, making everything from the wooden scaffolding poles to clay roof tiles and mortar, all from scratch.
Here they're making the mortar, the stuff that binds all the stones together. A mix of earth and sand, lime and water. Comme ça? Yeah. Castles were at the heart of the community. Everyone passed through these gates, from peasants to princes.
It's taking 45,000 tons of stone to build this castle. and it all has to be lifted using nothing but muscle power. So how do they get the stone to the top? The answer is a remarkably advanced crane that can lift as much as many modern construction cranes.
This is the most ingenious mechanism. This double drum tread wheel actually has the capacity to lift 2/3 of a ton. There's two of us working these wheels. It's walking away like hamsters. It's no different to walking on the treadmill at the gymnasium. You can see the huge payload of rock that we're lifting up. Now, the whole thing is swinging round. This pallet of stone is being swung into position, and we're now lifting it up to the masons on the upper level.
Guédelon is based on an 800-year-old French castle design. When it's finished, it will have 6 towers, a great hall, and high walls enclosing more than an acre of land, all surrounded by a huge dry moat.
This is the top of the Lord's Tower, laying this mortar to put in the next stone. But if you look at this stone, you see the detail and attention to this construction. There are all these mason marks on here. First of all, there's an arrow, which is telling us that this is the way it should face. That's the name of the man who made it, the man who cut this stone. And this is the measurement of it. In Roman numerals is the figure 8, telling me that it's 8 inches deep. I think I'm going to need your help. 8 in 1. So we do it up like that. Okay. There we go. And that is now hanging true, and that stone is perfect. And I have built a little tiny bit of Guédelon Castle.
This was precise engineering, creating buildings that would last for hundreds and hundreds of years. Castles remain a majestic sight in the European landscape today. I'm Mike Loads, and I'm going medieval to show you what life was like 800 years ago. It's a medieval journey that's full of surprises. With few decent roads, by far the best way to transport heavy goods was by ship.
The seas of Europe were full of these trading vessels. Cargo ships like this, which are known as cogs, were the workhorses of the sea. They're a single-masted vessel with very heavy sails and very broad, flat-bottomed boats. This meant they could carry a great deal of cargo. These decks could be full of timbers from Scandinavia, furs from the Baltic, or even just bringing cattle and livestock from one end of the country to the other. Now the sail has picked up our wind and we're moving along at really quite a clip.
These ships were so popular that by 1300, the Kingdom of Denmark alone had a fleet of over 1,000 of them.
The distinctive feature of the cog is that the steering rudder, the helm, is centrally mounted at the back. On earlier ships, it was on one side, where it was called the steerboard, the steering board. And of course, that's where we get the word starboard. And of course, if you've got your steering mechanism, your starboard, on one side, you can't go into port on that side. So you went into port on the other side, on the port side.
The shallow drafted design meant that you could dock these ships in any port throughout Europe. So any little coastal town could take in international trade and be a gateway to the wider world.
This wonderful place is the medieval centre in Denmark. It's an authentic replica of the sort of little port town that you would find all over Europe.
This place is a living history museum where everyone goes as medieval as possible.
And you see there's goods from all over the world here. Furs from the Baltic, there's wonderful wooden goods, pottery goods, clothing. Okay, I'm handsome in this. Yeah, very handsome. It's a good look for me. You think it's a good look? I haven't a clue what they're saying. I'm sure they think I look lovely. But the point is, they're speaking Danish, so I don't understand them. But that would be a real problem for the medieval traveller, not just travelling internationally, but in his own country.
Regional dialects were almost like different languages.
So that the traveller from York would find it very difficult to make himself understood in London. The man from Marseille would be incomprehensible in Paris.
Another problem in the marketplace was making sure you didn't get cheated.
Traders who tried to fleece the public, either by inflating prices or selling short measures or passing off cheap imitations, were publicly shamed by being placed in the pillory. There's an account of one Robert Porter in 1387. He was a baker, and he had put iron weights into the loaves of bread he was selling to make them weigh more. It was put in the pillory, and the iron weight was hung around his neck. And the loaf was hung around his neck, so there could be no mistake about what he'd done.
As if that wasn't bad enough, you had to endure the abuse of your neighbours as well.
They'd throw rotten vegetables, stinking fish, rotten eggs, animal dung, anything they could find, and he was there for several hours. And in a small community, this public shaming had a great effect. This was the equivalent of being on the front page of a tabloid newspaper.
Pillory wasn't the only punishment. Thieves could be branded on the face or the hands, so the world could see their crimes forever. The idea that medieval Europe was dull and grey is quite wrong. In fact, it was vibrant with dazzling colour. And in order to put that colour in their clothes, they used a surprising ingredient.
What we will be using is, in fact, stale urine produced by a man. And it's got to be a man, and it's got to be stale.
How old is this urine?
This is a month.
Julia Clark is an expert on medieval dyes. Wool and cloth were dyed with vegetable dyes, and for some colours, urine was a key part of the process.
And it goes.
We're now adding the stale urine of a man into the mix.
In London, in the 1300s, there were buckets on street corners for men to deposit their urine, which was then collected and taken to the local dye works. It's the ammonia in stale urine that fixes the dye, but modern science hasn't figured out if it really had to be a man's. The medieval world was a handmade world. Everyday needs were labour-intensive, and everyday goods were made not in mass production factories, but by home workers with artisan skills. Even the basic task of lighting a fire was a real art. When the sun went down, you might think that medieval life stopped, but that would be to underestimate the power of firelight, candles, drink, and good company.
This is a tavern. It's not especially welcoming to out-of-towners, not welcoming to strangers. For that, I would need to go to an inn. That's where a traveller would find food and lodging. A tavern is for the local community. Here, everybody knows everybody else. This is their local meeting place. I'm an out-of-towner to them, so I'm going to sit here on my own.
Taverns were so popular that in the 1300s, London had 3 times as many taverns as it did churches.
This is quite a respectable establishment. Having said that, it is where people would come to seek prostitutes, and you can tell them because they wear yellow hoods, a very distinctive trademark. Light and heat is expensive in the Middle Ages, and a tavern gives free light and free heat for people to come together. This was the centre of the community. Cheers.
Getting from place to place on land was simple. You either travelled on foot or used horses. And if on horseback, you used a special type of horse.
These are medieval travelling horses. In the Middle Ages, people used different horses for different purposes. These are not war horses, they are for travel. And they're very distinctive for this travelling gait. It's called the amble.
Modern horses have 4 gaits. They can walk, trot, canter and gallop. But these horses have a unique 5th gait. This is the amble, and it's a very fast walk. I'm going medieval on these horses with Toby Capwell and Gordon Summers, both expert riders.
And it's very comfortable, isn't it, Toby?
It is. It's very flat. As you can see, I'm not hardly going up and down at all. And it's a gait that's very comfortable, and you could go all day like this, really.
I mean, Gordon, this is your first time on one of these. What do you think?
These are fun. It's an extraordinary experience, unlike anything. But Toby's right. I could ride all day and then all night.
Medieval tracks were the highways of their day, and travellers encountered all sorts of folk on their journey. A common sight near towns and cities was the packman, leading a pack horse laden with firewood.
The only source of fuel for domestic heat was firewood. And these packmen would bring their pack horses into the towns and into the cities. They were the fuel trucks of the day. In London, around 1300, there was a population of about 80,000. You can imagine the amount of firewood they needed, not just for domestic heat, but to fire the pottery kilns, to fire the bread ovens, and to fire the blacksmiths' forges. Convoys of packmen were the lifeline to the cities.
Whoever he met on the road, the medieval traveller had to reach his destination before nightfall.
The medieval forests of this period are teeming with bandits. Deserters from the army, men on the run from the law and from their lord have sought refuge in the forest and are living desperate men. And they need an income, and we make very easy pickings if we're not heavily armed.
The threat of attack in the Middle Ages was real, and people armed themselves as a matter of course. I've been going medieval to explore the reality of the Middle Ages. It was an age of extraordinary ingenuity and surprises.
The stale urine of a man.
One myth is that knights were lumbering heavyweights. The truth is the complete opposite. This highly mobile warrior was the product of an arms race that began hundreds of years earlier with an even more flexible form of armor. It was called mail and was a body covering made of tightly interlocked iron rings. But mail was never designed to be worn on its own. It was always part of a layered system of protection.
For almost 1,000 years, the war gear of the fighting man hardly changed. It was like this. A man is wearing a quilted, padded coat called an acketon. And if he can afford it, over the top, he's got a mail shirt. But whatever you're doing, this textile armor is the key, isn't it? I mean, this is really what is stopping the impact. That's the deal with the textile armor, isn't it? It's like, that might turn a blade, give a deflecting surface, but this is what's protecting against the blunt trauma. If I really whack him, that's what's giving you the protection, is this heavily padded undergarment.
Mail armor was designed to protect a warrior from close-range attack by sword and spear, but it also had to defend against the long-range weapon of the day.
Drop!
The warbow.
Loose! Loose!
There was nothing new about archery in battle, but what the makers of mail armor were up against was the sheer power of the warbow.
This is the English Warbow Society. These are phenomenally powerful bows.
The key to this power is the draw weight.
The draw weight of a bow is simply a measurement of how many pounds it takes to pull the string to full draw. And Mark draws to 32 inches, and that means this bow is 170 pounds. It takes 170 pounds of muscle power to pull it back to full draw.
So how effective were these bows on the battlefield? At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English, under King Edward III, fought a French army that outnumbered them by around 5 to 1. Despite overwhelming odds, the English forces won the day. The key to Edward's victory was archers. He took 7,000 archers, nearly half his army, to the battle.
Now, if we could conservatively think they could shoot probably 10 or 12 arrows a minute, that means in just a quarter of an hour, they've shot over 1 million arrows. And this is a battle that went on for hours and hours. That would exhaust arrow stocks very, very quickly. And arrows are extremely sophisticated and expensive ammunition. So what's the best way to use them?
Some people believe that in battle, medieval archers shot at long range, maybe even up to 300 yards. I think that's unlikely.
There is no medieval piece of art or manuscript that shows archers shooting in elevation. You don't see them shooting up like that. In battle scenes, they are always shooting directly like that. I think they shot at much closer range, probably at 30